Let's say you recently finished watching your go-to series and are now facing the task of trying to find something new to watch. Perhaps the most common approach is jumping into different apps and seeing what's suggested. You could find your next watch here, but this time you don't really see anything that intrigues you. Sometimes you already know what you want, and then you usually search by name or go into categories. But this time you don't really know where to start. This project is an attempt to design a last resort discovery tool in tvOS that allows you to reliably find something that fits your current preferences, even when all other methods fail. It's not going to be as fast as clicking recommendations, and it's not going to be the best way to search for a show you already know. But when you're stuck and you don't know where to go, this tool should help you move forward and eventually discover something that you want to watch. Chapter 1. This project's relation to existing solutions. This type of problem is not novel, and there are many ways existing products allow users to explore new content that doesn't usually show up on the homepage. Of course, users can almost always manually filter or discover content within categories. But to do that, they have to be able to articulate what they want before they see it. Most media platforms are also suggesting more content similar to the one you just clicked. Pinterest is a good example of this because the effect is so prominent. You click on one image and on the next page you get 100 more similar to that one. What I see as being good with this approach is that with every interaction you do, even if you don't immediately get what you want, you get closer and closer to finding something you like. This is different from scrolling through suggestions because there you basically just go through pieces of content one by one until you by chance land on something interesting. Of course, suggestions are personal and today's systems already filter away unlikely choices. But no apps understand you that well, and especially not your preferences right now. So it would be very beneficial if we can offer users a tool that allows them to explore the landscape of content uniquely for that moment. However, doing the classical method where you click on links and get new suggestions on the next page is quite slow and it's hard to quickly build up intuition of what's available. So I think there's an opportunity for tvOS to implement a tool that would make this process more rapid and effective. And then for this project, the big question is, how would the interface for a tool like that look and behave like? Chapter 2. Different ways of moving around. One idea to make this work is just to have a big ocean of cells like this, where each cell is a movie or a TV show or some other piece of content. The cells close to each other are more similar to each other, so you just go towards what you like and you should get more of that. The issue here is that there are just too many cells. It would take forever to go through all of the bad ones before you start getting to something more interesting. Even when you start to come to a better area, there are for sure going to be a ton of bad ones there as well, because every single findable piece of content has to be on the same level. To solve this, we need a way to browse a wider style of cells early on and then go deeper into an area that we like. Under the hood, you can think of this as a classic see more like this feature. This mechanic can work even better today with the reasoning capabilities of large language models. With every level the user goes down, the content within that level is more and more similar to each other. That way, we narrow down the current preferences as we go, which gets the user closer and closer to what they're interested in as of the current moment. It's worth mentioning though that there always has to be some diversity of cells even as we get deeper, so that there is opportunity for the user to pivot, even if they're deeper down. It's actually quite easy to prototype this yourself using any good LLM, like ChatGPT or Gemini like I'm using here. We can start by generating the first layer of this, so we can just type something like, give me 5 TV shows or movies. Make them very different from each other. So it gives me some concrete movies or TV shows, but it also shows me how they're different from each other. And so let's say that I really like Inside Out, and I want to see more of that. That's the one that seems the most interesting to me when I just look at these. So I say, give me 5 more like Inside Out. The new ones should not be extremely similar to Inside Out, but follow the general theme. But make sure the new ones are not similar to 1 to 4. I don't want it to only show me things that are extremely similar to Inside Out, because then I would get stuck very quickly. So I want to still keep things open,
but I want my decision to matter. It's actually really good at following my request. It doesn't give me only animated movies. We have Soul, but we also have Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. We still have things like Up, but then here is something quite different. But still you can tell that it takes up nuances of Inside Out and it gives me more of that. Let's say I'm looking at all of these and I'm seeing Soul and I'm saying that's exactly what I like. Give me more like Soul and Inside Out. Make sure the new ones are not similar to the other ones I didn't pick. So now it's making a third layer, which is very distinct to these two decisions. And we can see here, Coco, The Puss in Boots, Spirited Away, Turning Red, and WALL-E. Looking at this, you can actually tell that it's quite an effective way of narrowing down the scope. It shows you how the backend could work. It also shows you how I don't need to necessarily know what I want when I begin, but I can look what's in front of me and I can still explore things very intentionally. So of course, this is just a basic prototype. And in reality, it would actually work a lot with designing these prompts to power the backend of this system. But you can see here how an LLM does actually enable us to do a lot more complicated suggestions that generate these very distinct paths that I think would be quite hard to do without an LLM. But then how would the interface for a system like this look like?
Because the Siri remote only allows us to move up, down, left and right, we essentially end up with variations of two options. Either you place the cell within one layer in a column, and as you go deeper, you go into newly generated columns. Or you can do the same thing but with rows instead. In most places on tvOS, whether it being the home screen or within apps, you start at the top and you go down. Specifically in apps, you often have groups of elements in a row, and then you press left and right to move between the elements of the same group, and then you press up and down to go between the groups. Because people are familiar with that concept, it made sense to follow that principle for this use case as well. So I started iterating on variations of this basic layout and mechanic. One place to start is to decide how many cells should be on each row. The most basic option is to simply have 2, which makes the decision super simple. The problem here is that each decision doesn't tell the system a lot about what you are interested in, so you would need to make a lot of decisions for the system to find something for you. An alternative is to have a lot of cells on the same row, let's say 10 or maybe infinite. But here, each decision I found to be quite overwhelming because you have so many options. The goal is to have as many cells per row as possible, so each decision actually informs the system of your current preferences. But you also want to have a good mental model of all your options, so it's easy to pick the best one. I ended up choosing 4 as a sweet spot. It is a little bit of an arbitrary pick, but it does feel comfortable and aligns well with the information I found online about the topic. Chapter 3: Optimizing flow between rows. The initial idea was that all the elements on screen are stationary and the focus is what moves around, because this is how most things in tvOS work. The issue is that, let's say you move down one row and then move sideways a bit. If you want to go back, you have to first move back horizontally to where you initially entered the row and then go up. It could be quite a lot of steps to simply go up one row. Now, technically, pressing up could always lead you to the previous row, but the lack of proximity I found felt a bit unnatural. What if we instead let the rows slide horizontally, which keeps the chosen cell of the previous row right above where the user currently is? That way, it's easy and natural for the user to always press up to go back to the previous row. Chapter 4: Maintaining good overview of the options. A smaller issue I discovered was that if you're currently focusing on either the first or the fourth cell in a row, the cell on the opposite side on the same row went outside of the screen, if the screen size is 1080p. With 4K resolutions, tvOS usually use smaller elements, so then you could always see the 4 cells in a row at the same time. But I thought it was interesting to explore the issue of the 1080p screens. So while this is not detrimental, I wanted to see if there was a way to keep all 4 cells visible at all times, so it's easier to have an overview of your decision no matter what. I didn't want to shrink the size of everything because it made it uncomfortable to see. So I came up with a concept where only the width of the cells dynamically adjust, so they take up more space when they can, but shrink when necessary. Chapter 5: Does it work at all? Before I went deeper, I wanted a more functional proof of concept, so I put together a simple web app using some vibe coding. It was visually very far from where I was going with the project, and that definitely hurt the experience of using the tool. But the general mechanism worked, and it was as easy as I hoped to explore the landscape of content. It felt promising enough to continue. Chapter 6. Grounding in the OS. It was really time to work on how exactly this feature would be implemented in the OS. tvOS both has a search app, but also if you click on the Siri button on the side of the Siri remote, you get this overlay, which doesn't really do that much as far as I can tell. I think this screen is actually a really nice place to search for content across the device. It feels like you get this quick access to an OS feature without instantly getting thrown out of the app you are in. I think here you should be able to both search normally, discover within categories, and then potentially also have my concept here. In tvOS 26, you also have liquid glass, which makes a lot of sense to use in an overlay like this because it exaggerates the feeling of being on top of whatever you are in, because you can still see what's behind this UI. I think in that way, this feature feels more like a part of the OS that can reach everywhere, rather than its own app that's independent of the other apps. There are many ways these three methods of finding content could be implemented, but I decided to have a simple tab bar on top to switch between them. This is definitely an area to work more on, but for this concept I just went with this simple implementation which doesn't compete with existing features. Chapter 7. Finding together. If you're more than one person trying to find something to watch, it's important that you can talk about what you see on the screen. It was quite clear that you had to put the name of the movie or show visible somewhere. I quickly explored some options for how this would be done so that I knew that it would not be a huge problem for this concept. For this project, I just ended up adding a dark gradient and a white logo on the currently focused cell. There definitely could be better ways of doing this, but it seems to be a more visual problem, which is not really what this project is about, and honestly not the type of work that interests me enough to spend a lot of time on as of now. Chapter 8. Hint. Wherever the user is, they need to know that they can press down to get to a new cell group. And by the way, cell group is what I call the clusters of 4 cells. It's almost the same as a row, but a row technically contains multiple cell groups. The most basic approach would be to show the full hinted cell group below the current one. The main problem here is that the hinted cells would change every time you go between 2 cells, meaning if they are this big and visible, so much is changing on the screen every time you move. I tried just turning down the opacity of the hinted cell groups, but the problem remains. So I started iterating on a smaller hint element. I tried having the movies and shows still visible inside this smaller element as a miniature, but they got too small to be useful, and it just looks messy. Even though it's of course fully possible to have an icon for this, I like the idea of having the hinted element as a miniature of this full cell group to make the two things feel more connected. I ended up with these 4 simple dots, which I think also reads a little bit as like a see more symbol. One of the dots is also bigger, which indicates the cell that will be focused once you open up the new cell group. This will always initially be the first one, but if you leave the group on any of the other 3, the first dot will no longer be the bigger one, but rather the one corresponding to the cell you last left. I also felt like you wanted the new cell group to be visually connected to the current cell you are focusing on. So I added this bridge between the hint element and the current cell group right beneath the focus cell using liquid glass. This little bridge will become even more important in the next chapter. Chapter 9. Ancestors. The ancestors are cell groups that you come from, or in other words, it's the cell groups above the current row. Having them just go up works, but there are things to improve. First of all, it would be nice to remove some of the attention of the ancestors, so the primary element the user focuses on is on the current row. But I don't want to shrink the ancestors like the hinted layer, because 1, you want to see where you come from because it helps you understand what you're looking at on the current row. And number 2, it's nice to see which paths you didn't take. I want to see those because then you could go back and go into another path in one go. If you don't see them, you first have to go up 1 step, then stop to see what's there, and then keep moving into another path. By having them visible at all times, it's easier for the user to make a couple of moves in a sequence without having to stop and look. Secondly, you want to clearly see which of the cells above you actually selected. So I ended up doing a couple of things here. You remember the bridge I used to connect the current focused cell group to the hinted cell group? We can use the same thing here to connect the current cell group to the previous selected cell. I also split up the ancestor groups so the non-selected cells are not connected at all to the selected one. The last thing I ended up doing was to turn down the opacity of the non-selected cells to really exaggerate the focus to the current row and clearly show which cell above was selected. This solution makes all the cell above visible, so you can easily go back and go into another path, but you can still clearly see which one you chose, and it feels connected to the current cell group you're in. Chapter 10. Helping the system. Let's say you go into this knowing you want to watch an episode of a TV show because you don't have enough time to watch an entire movie, but then the system keeps showing you movies. Wouldn't it be nice to let the system know that you only want TV shows and remove all the noise you don't want to see? The idea of filtering became interesting. To begin exploring this idea, I wrote down a list of specific parameters that the user could use to filter with. You can see them now on the screen. I had an idea to offer the user the ability to add custom instructions with Apple Intelligence. For example, the user could go far right on the row, then use voice to input what they want to see, and then the current cell group and all the ones below would be adjusted to fit what you described. This idea I think is a bit cool, but I don't think that's enough reason to go for it. I only want to add something like this if it addresses a solid scenario where the features significantly improve the situation. By going through this tool, the system should learn what you want to see and show you more of that. So if your preferences on a specific parameter is picked up by the system, the AI filtering isn't really needed. On top of that, there has to be parameters I believe people are actually strict with. So strict that if the system keeps showing them the wrong stuff, it makes them irritated. So for the AI filtering to be implemented, there has to be parameters that the system doesn't weigh that strongly, but still users sometimes really care about. I went through all of the parameters that I showed and evaluated them on these two things. I'm not going to go through my reasoning for all of these, but I will put them on the screen for now, and if you want, you can pause and read my thoughts. I ended up feeling that filtering for movies or TV shows was the only parameter that would add a lot of effect to the user experience. I still ended up feeling it didn't really justify this feature, but I will put up my detailed thoughts on the screen if you're interested in the reasoning behind my conclusion. So I actually ended up skipping this feature completely, but a related problem did come up that had an effect on the design, which I will talk about in the next chapter. Chapter 11. The system don't always see things like you do. Let's say a show like Silo comes up, which I really like, but as I go deeper, I only get suggestions I don't like. The system may look at Silo and say, this show involves a lot of action and has Rebecca Ferguson in it, but what I really like is the mystery. This would be frustrating because you feel like you lose an opportunity to explore a very interesting path. I thought it was interesting to tell the system, I really like this piece of content, but I want to see other stuff than what you're showing me. To handle this feature, I thought of a simple refresh feature that lets you do just that. It gives the system a bit more flexibility without overwhelming the user with infinite options. Exactly how the new suggestions are selected needs to be understood further. Do you just want to see more alternatives following the same logic, or do you want the system to look at a completely different parameter? I don't know, but by implementing an interface element like this, at least we have the opportunity to explore this question. Okay, last chapter, which is chapter 12, limitations of the project. That was the general process and reasoning for how this project came to be, but there are some uncertainties and issues that I haven't really mentioned that I want to bring up. So number one, the experience of finding content is not only about interface design. There are many stakeholders involved with the product. Apple, of course, have Apple TV and tvOS, but they also have Apple TV Plus, which provide movies and series, which does compete with other content providers like Netflix and HBO Max, etc. These businesses are for sure intricate, and I don't really have a good understanding of how they work, and there could be many factors that prevent this concept from working in practice. There are some aspects of my design that aren't traditionally tvOS. The entire thing about moving the row horizontally like this, making the focused element stay in the middle at all times, is not something I've seen in the OS or within apps. Also, the cells are capsules rather than rounded rectangles. It's a small thing, but it's also not that common for larger elements like this in tvOS. Now, whether or not these things break the consistency of the system is hard to tell, but I think allowing to push these things a little bit is a better approach for a personal project like this. That wraps up this project. If you want to learn more or think I can help you and your team with this type of work, I'm always interested in hearing about it. So don't hesitate to send me an email to this address. So thank you for watching this long video, and I hope you have a nice rest of the day.